Okay, team, very good afternoon to you. So the inflation data has been dropped. February's inflation's out, and the headlines are we are dropping quickly. Inflation is on its way down. So very quickly stay on this live. I want to scrutineer the information because is everything just on its way down, or is this a temporary drop? And is there anything in the data that we should be worried about, especially in the property community? So as ever, when I'm live, please give me a thumbs up, hit like and find a comments button if the live stream is working and you can see or hear me. I never quite know. And if you're following along on the replay, please again, put your comments in, put your questions in as we go through, and I'll always come back to you. So let's dive straight in to the figures. So the main figures are that CPI, well, let's start with CPIH. CPIH has now dropped to 3.8% from 4.2% that it was in January. So on the surface of it, a decent drop. CPI itself dropped from 4% in January to 3.4%. Okay, so, you know, we're starting to close in on that 2% target figure, aren't we? But I want to scroll down, and I'm not gonna labor this too much today, and look at this graph here, right? And I want everybody to put something in the comments about what is startlingly wrong with this graph, okay? What is the big thing that stands out? And to me, very obviously, the owner-occupier housing cost element of this. So I'm just going to take CPI and CPIH off, and let's just focus on that graph, because when we were over here, okay, so this was October 23, and we saw a little drop into November. I was like, okay, look, we've seen a little blip. That does not, or a little drop, that does not mean we've seen a trend reversal, but we're definitely not going up in a straight line. I think the increase we've now seen from January to February, from 5.4 to 6% in terms of owner-occupier housing costs, is significant. And again, when we look at this, that to me looks like hockey stick in terms of a diagram. Now, why do I want to labor this point about owner-occupier housing cost? We're going to dive in and see how it's calculated. It's calculated with something called a rental equivalency value of a property. But the biggest point is this whole basket of goods, this CPI versus CPIH, or just however we want to, look at it, is not necessarily a representative picture of what people are actually spending their money on. I keep focusing that when we're looking at affordability, and affordability is a direct link to the UK housing market, there are two main things that people will be spending their money on: food and shelter. Now, we have seen a big drop in food. In fact, if I find the food element and just get the graph, there we go. If we look at the graph, we have seen a significant drop, and food inflation is now down at 5% from a peak a year ago of around 20%. Now, this doesn't mean that food's getting cheaper. Please do not forget that inflation is a rate of change. So when people say inflation has dropped, or food inflation has dropped from 20% to 5%, it doesn't mean food prices are dropping. It means that the rate of change has dropped. So things are still getting more expensive, but at a slower rate. Now, I'm not saying this is a bad thing, by the way. I think everybody can agree that going out and doing a weekly shop is like going out and making a mortgage payment these days, and it's been extremely punitive on many people, the price increase on food. We're still at 5%. So that 5% is compounding on the 20% we had last year, which compounds on whatever we had the year before. So things are still getting more expensive, but on a slower basis. The point is, food and shelter are probably the two main expenses that most people have, right? Food is still going up, albeit at 5%, but that owner-occupier housing cost, that is the amount that it's, the rate of change of owning a property. And this falls into one of the subcategories, which is housing and household services. So again, let's go back into this. And if we scroll down all the way to this housing and household services, and I want to just get the... in fact, let's just look at this, right? So this is the rate of change, or the contributions in the rate of change to this month's printout. Most things are coming down. Fantastic. Housing and household services up, of which owner-occupier housing cost up. Okay, this is going to be the biggest expense that most people pay on a monthly basis. So therefore, even though other things are getting better, this is getting worse. And I would suggest that actually, and the reason for the thumbnail on the video is that the rate that they're getting worse is wildly underreported, and I'll justify that in a bit. So anyway, I want to get to this is what I want to get to. This is the occupier contribution from owner occupier housing costs. So this graph is basically the breakdown of household services, which is one of the buckets, one of the baskets in CPI. The blue, we can see here, if I take the blue off, that's electricity, gas, and other fuels. I want to take that off because I think that is skewing it at the moment. Let's also take off maintenance repair. Let's take off council tax and water and sewage, which leaves us with two things. Okay, the burgundy is our owner occupier housing costs, and our rents, right, are well, as it says, right, it's the rental amount. Now again, let's just look at that. Let's just look at that graph, because from my point of view, right, that is going up fairly considerably, and it's still going up. Now, I don't even want to go into conspiracy theories about why we talk about CPI rather than CPIH. So, the metric that the government uses, the metric that not HMRC, Bank of England uses is CPI. CPI has all of this stripped out, right? So none of this actually makes any difference at all. Well, I say all of it. The rental stuff's in there. It's the owner-occupier housing costs are stripped out. So all of this burgundy rate of increase is taken out of the CPI basket. I have no idea why. Maybe somebody might want to enlighten me why our main metric removes probably one of the largest costs that most people have to factor in if they own a house. But anyway, going back to it, we can see without a shadow of a doubt, this is getting worse for most people. Now, I think it's important to understand how this owner-occupier housing cost is calculated. Where does this figure come from? So I'm going to dive into that in just a sec. Before I do, we're closing in rapidly on 4,000 subscribers. My goal is to get to 5,000 as quickly as possible. I'd like to explain why it's important for me and how you can help me do it. So I'm just going to ask for 30 seconds of your time to talk about that, and then we'll go into how the owner-occupier housing cost is calculated. Regulars, you'll know that I'm fascinated by data. And when I look at the channel stats, I can see that just under 65% of people who watch my videos aren't actually subscribed to the channel. Now, I do know this stat is actually way above the average for YouTube and shows the power of the community that we're building here. But I want to do better, and I'd like to make a deal with you. I've got a vision to empower as many people as possible on this planet to take ownership of their futures using income-producing assets to reclaim your time, freedom, and choice. And if you can just hit that subscribe button, I'll work tirelessly to grow this channel, make it better and better for you so we can fulfill that vision together. I cannot tell you how much it helps. As the channel gets bigger, I can put more resources behind it, improve the production, the content, and ultimately the value that I give to you. So if you could do me that small favor and hit that subscribe button now, as well as the like button on this video, it would mean so much to me as we continue to grow this community together. It's the only favor I'll ever ask you. Thank you, and let's get back to the episode. Okay, please, if you're not subscribed and you find value in these videos, please hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. Just watching now, I've realized I'm looking a little bit shabby coming straight from the gym today, but I wanted to get this out as soon as possible. Right, so we said we're going to loop onto how the owner-occupier housing costs are actually calculated. And this is the definition of OOH, right, from the ONS website. There are several ways that they can use to calculate OOH, but for CPI or CPIH calculation, they use something called the rental equivalence value. Okay, so I want to read this for you. CPIH uses an approach called rental equivalence to measure OOH. Rental equivalence uses the rent paid for an equivalent house as a proxy for the costs faced by an owner-occupier. In other words, this answers the question, how much would I have to pay in rent to live in a home like mine for an owner-occupier? OOH does not seek to capture increases in house prices. Although this may be inconsistent with some users' expectations and measurements of OOH, the inclusion of an asset price and therefore capital gains would make the index less suitable for a measure of consumption. OOH currently accounts for 16.5% of the expenditure weight of CPIH, so it's a fairly big part of the CPIH basket. This compares with a weight of 19.5% in 2005. Interestingly, it's been pared back, and I'm not going to go into weightings today. So what does that mean? Because I think a lot of people misunderstand OOH, and I do see other people in the YouTube space, it's quite big channels, talking about OOH as the cost of your mortgage. And one of the reasons that the OOH has been going up is because people are coming off cheap fixed rate debt, therefore their mortgages go up, therefore it's more expensive to own a house. I believe this is an incorrect narrative. Okay, and as it says there in black and white, I believe the rental equivalency value is actually what's it cost to rent an equivalent property. And that's how they're comparing, because you can imagine if they're trying to do it with mortgage payments, everybody's on different loan to values or mortgage rates, all that sort of stuff. It's not a fair comparison. So they kind of baseline everything with how much would it cost to rent an equivalent house. Now, again, why is this important? Well, the first thing for me is, if this is how OOH is calculated, then it's failing to capture the actual increase of cost for people who are coming off cheap fixed rate debt. So we'll have a look at rental increases in a bit, but we're talking, maybe we've seen some double digit over, the last year, 18 months, and we're still very high in terms of rent inflation. But rent inflation clearly is going to be small fry in terms of somebody who's coming off a, 1.5%, 2% mortgage rate and going on to a 5.5% mortgage rate. So the reality is many people who own their homes and are coming off cheap fixed rate debt are going to be experiencing in real terms a much higher increase in their cost of living. So their affordability is going to be impacted more than these headline figures of CPI and CPIH reflect. So when everybody says, hey, look, this is all great, everything's getting back to target, I would suggest there's some inaccuracies in that narrative. It kind of that ties us into nicely this new report that the ONS are putting out. So the Land Registry is still going to be the source data for UK HPI House Price Index. For this month, for March, the ONS is no longer going to be publishing its traditional house price index report, and it's created something, it's combined a private rented house price report for the UK. Okay, so this is the first one, and if you want to go and have a look at this and read why they've done this. So from today, from the 20th of March, hot off the press, this bulletin replaces the UK House Price Index, the Index of Private Housing Rental Prices, and Private Rental Market Summary Stats. So it's combining three different reports into one. It's kind of focused very much, interestingly, on the rent rather than the house price. So let's just go and have a look. So this has come out today. Let's see where we are. So average UK rents have increased by, I didn't mean to go that direction, by, 9%. In the 12 months to Feb 2024, so extremely high rent inflation. I'm going to break it down by region, country and region in a sec. And then I want to go to the house price index. The house prices decreased by 0.6% in the 12 months to Jan 24, up from a decrease of 2.2% revised estimate in the 12 months to December 23. So rents going up, house prices still coming down according to the ONS data, which we would expect. When I went live yesterday and said the release was coming out today, I said I would expect a drop down, which is different to what the Halifax, Nationwide and Rightmove HPIs are talking about. That's mainly because of the lag. So we're very much still looking at data from even last summer 23. Let's go and have a look at this in a graphical format. So this is actually combining, interestingly, as a graph. It's quite nice to have a look at this. Private rent and house price annual inflation. So we're seeing rents continue to go up. I know there's been some discussion about sort of rent increases topping out. This data does not seem to agree with that unless, again, there's a lot of lag. I don't know what the lag, I'm going to look into it, the lag in terms of the data for rent. If we look at the house price inflation, we can see we've been in negative every month since June 23. We are now seeing a reversal of that, actually. So the trend, and it's only 1 month, right? This could continue back down. We do not know. But we've certainly seen an arrest of the trend in terms of an annual rate of decline. So it'll be interesting to see over the next 2 months how this continues, if we go into positive territory again, or we have a resumption in going down. I do know that we got differences. I want to, let's just have a look. Sorry, I'm not being unfair to Scotland, Wales. In fact, I want to look at the percentage changes, not the actual nominal amounts. Here we go. This is what I wanted to look at. Let's just take England for a sec, because England was quite noticeable when we look at the rate of change in rents. This is the rent annual inflation. And I believe this is one of the reasons why we're seeing the OOH increasing as well, because if we are using the rental equivalency value to calculate the OOH, right, let's just go back to remind ourselves on this. So we've actually got the rental, value going up, and you can see if we look at the actual amounts there, you can see this is the percentage of the CPIH component. So we're 0.44 on rents, which is the highest it's been, right? And on OOH, we are at 0.95, okay? So again, that's the highest it's been, certainly in this data set. So both of these are spiking up, and I believe that's mainly due to the increase in private rental inflation. Now, again, look, the bugbear that I get with this is that when the government, when the Bank of England, and when the mainstream media talk about inflation, they're talking about CPI. So it takes all of this out of it. I do not know. I do not understand. I cannot understand why that is the case. The other thing that I think is interesting in terms of a potential anomaly in this data set, I'm just scrolling up to go onto this overview of the CPI data. So when the CPI data is presented, it gives us CPIH, it gives us CPI, and it gives us the OOH index. And I'm always quite interested both to look at the rolling 12-month, okay, and the last month to see what's happened on the last month. If we go CPI, so if we go in the February data, okay, so sorry, CPI is 3.4. This is the headline figure that everybody's talking about, this 3.4. Let me just zoom in on this so you can see it. Okay, that's the headline figure. CPIH is 3.8, so it's higher. So it's come down less, if that makes sense. So the difference from January to February is 0.6 for the CPI, 0.4 for the CPIH, which would make sense. What I'm struggling to get my head around, if I'm totally honest, is the month on month, right? We have a 0.6% month on month for CPIH and a 0.6% month on month for CPI. And I'm struggling to understand, with the OOH going up so much, how the month on month can be the same. Doesn't quite make sense to me. But if we just snap out and look at the last, the trailing 12 months, if you remember, I said the chances are we're going to see inflation stick in Q1. And when I say Q1, what I actually meant was December, January, and February. So it's December 23, January 24, February 24, because the 1 month change for those a year ago was very small. So we had a minus 0.4, plus 0.4, minus 0.4. So it was a net, I think, minus 0.4 over that quarter. And then I've always said, when we go into Q2, or effectively now, we see, let's just go for the CPI for the moment. Month on month, Feb 23 was 1.1, March 23 was 0.8, April 23 was 1.2. So we've got some fairly chunky month on month increases in inflation that are going to drop out of the data set over the next few months. And therefore, the supposition was, or the hypothesis was always sticking in Q1 and then seeing quite a significant reduction in CPI over Q2 2024. Now, how is that going to play into interest rates? Bank of England have agreed with this. So if we go to issues with the Bank of England, there we go, we got into it, monetary report. If we look at the last Bank of England monetary report, okay, and I want to go to the inflation, the Bank of England forecast is that, and this is February's monetary report, that we would potentially see inflation back to 2% target very quickly. It says within a few months, so February, March, April, May, potentially talking May to get to 2% target. But then they anticipate that inflation is going to go up again. So if I, does it talk about it there? They do, if you look at the graph, you can see it hitting sort of, end of Q2 24 target, and then starting to rise again. So that's because various other things coming back in cost of energy. We have to see what happens with cost of energy. But this increase in rent and OOH, I think I feel it should be having more impact than it is on the CPIH. Okay. So what does this mean with interest rates? It's an interesting one with interest rates, because headline, inflation coming down. You'd think that would go to quite a quick, reduction in interest rates. But if they're anticipating inflation coming back up again, don't forget in April we see minimum wage rates change, especially for younger demographics. I would imagine we'd see some quite big wage rises in private sector and public sector as we come to end of financial year. So that wage inflation could well, feed into inflation again. That I can see they are worried about coming down too quickly and letting inflation come in for a secondary sort of effects inflation, which is why probably the markets are, anticipating that we're going to push back a bit more and come down less than they thought maybe end of last year. Okay, so that's where I believe we are right now in terms of inflation. That was today's report. If you've got any questions, let me know. I didn't want to spend too long on it today. I just wanted to get that out. Brody, thanks for your questions. You said how many? Do you have any idea how many people are in the bucket of paying variable rate interest on an owner-occupied property? Absolutely no idea at all. We can probably have a little look at the stats on mortgage lending for that. So fixed versus variable rates. My impression is a lot of people are hanging themselves out on more expensive variable rate products right now in the anticipation of interest rates falling. Whether that is a wise idea or not, I don't know. But certainly I would imagine people who were coming off their fixed rates in Q4 last year into January this year, with the market expectation of a fairly aggressive and quicker rate drop than the bank has been saying, I think have been sitting on variable rates, probably costing them a lot more. This, of course, is being offset by wage rises, strong wage growth, and still, even though it's softening, still a tight labour market. So the honest answer to that, Brady, is I don't know, I'm afraid, but we can have a look and see. So there we go. That's what I've got for today. Hope that was useful for you to have a look through. We will see how this pans out over the next few months. Of course, look, whatever happens, all the narrative now is when does policy change from tightening to easing? It will happen at some point. As I always say, and I'll do a live to talk through theory of this again, I don't think it particularly matters when. I think what really matters in terms of UK housing market is by how much it comes down. Where do they settle into the medium to long term? Do we settle into the into the threes as a Bank of England base rate? Do we come lower? A lot of that is, I believe, will be settling, sort of mid to high threes for the foreseeable, unless there is a shock event that causes the economy to go down, at which point we'll have to go back into cutting, aggressively. But if we do sit and stabilize in that sort of, threes, high threes, early fours, even, I think we're going to be in for a much longer period of nominal property price stagnation than people maybe think. So I'm not remotely thinking that we're going to be reversing and going back into boom market. I'm thinking we're going to be in some sort of stagnation, if not, as I said yesterday, marginal nominal price drops for the rest of 2024, larger real term price drops, and that could be for another few years yet, is my thoughts. There you go. All right, team, I'm going to call it a day there. I hope that's been useful. And there we go. 2 lives in 2 days. Would you believe it? I'll probably see you next week. Have a good one, everyone.